So I was consulting for Amazon, but I had a terrible colleague who then became my boss. And she just traumatized me. And it was so impactful that actually I decided that I was going to give up my career. Originally, it was kind of like, I want to automate this crazy lady out of a job so no one has to deal with her again.
Minty is an expert in business strategy and has built a tool to allow businesses to have sustainable growth, to evaluate risk, and essentially prevent your business from failing. Taking the knowledge that usually only sits with large corporations, she makes it accessible to small and medium-sized businesses and packages it in a way that's super valuable to investors.
We moved around a lot as kids. He is traumatized by change. For me, I thrived in this environment. Our closest main supermarket is in Alice Springs, which is 4 or 5 hours away. So there's really nothing there. So you always face these barriers, and I just didn't have the confidence in myself to go and do it. A lot of the reasons why businesses fail are completely preventable. What you want to understand is, what are the most important ones? What is your secret sauce? And then how do we make sure that that doesn't harm you, doesn't harm your consumers, and doesn't harm the wider market? You may have 100 ingredients that make up your recipe of your business, but what you want to understand is, what are the most important ones? We need to think a little bit more holistically when we're just dishing out money. It's crazy how much money people are losing on companies that are just a fancy idea.
So if someone wants to integrate resilience into their business strategy, what's a good place for them to start?
The most amazing place for a business to start is...
Welcome to the Good Profits Podcast, where we explore today's most inspiring, purpose-driven businesses. I'm your host, Doriana, and we'll be exploring and diving deeper into the world of sustainability, ethical business, and social enterprise. If you've ever had a success or failure in your business and you weren't exactly sure what to attribute it to, you definitely want to watch this episode.
We're here with Minty today. She's an expert in business strategy, specifically around incorporating sustainability, making sure businesses do not fail through structured framework. So I'll hand it over to you, Minty, to kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the interview.
Awesome. I'm Minty. Really great to be here. A bit of background about myself. I'm a founder. I have a company called Mangrove, which is a software company, and I specialize in resilience consulting. So effectively what you said, I help businesses to build better, scale faster, and fail less.
So Minty, one of the things I really like to ask people is to know about the why behind why they're doing what they're doing.
Yes. I have a few whys, and I feel like they're just, each time I get a why, it kind of changes the trajectory of what I've been doing. But initially, I had a very traumatic experience with someone at one of my consulting companies. So I was consulting for Amazon, which was probably one of the nicer, larger contracts that I had. But I had a terrible colleague who then became my boss. And she just traumatized me, to be honest. I've never met someone so horrible. And it was so impactful that actually I decided that I was going to give up my career. And at that point, I'd had some really amazing clients like Goldman Sachs. I'd worked for the stock exchange in Germany. I'd worked for some really well-known asset managers in London. And I was just at that point, pretty traumatized. That's it. I'd finished my data science degree. I'm going to go be a data scientist. But then after a while, I had a friend come to me and say, actually, just reflect on stuff. You're amazing at what you do. Take some time. And maybe this is the why for you to go and actually start your business that you've been talking about for so long. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. It was how do I put a gap between me and my clients? How do I make sure that we automate the jobs of people like this so they can't maybe inflict pain on other people? And it started there. And I guess in that journey over time, I've had different whys and different impacts from people. And then I've moved into kind of the startup and venture capital space and working with businesses there. So, yeah.
So with this horrible colleague that turned into your boss, this was before you started your company?
So I was consulting. So the thing is, it's really interesting. I've always been working for myself. I've only ever had one full job, and that was my most recent job. So from the age of 15 to 26, 27, I've always worked for myself, but I never really saw it as a company. I just saw it as me selling my abilities to build strategy and stuff. For me, a business was something where you sell a product, or maybe you have people, maybe you have an office. I had kind of more of a traditional view of what a business was, because I was never really in this entrepreneur space until recently. So yeah, I never technically I did have a business and I was working for myself, but I just saw it as like consulting. So that's when I kind of pivoted and went into software, because I was like, I have a very unique perspective and I have a very simplified framework and it works in every type of business. So let's turn that into a product and sell that to the masses and make it accessible.
Yeah. So would you say, you said your friend came to you and was like, hold on, maybe you should change your perspective. Would you say that was kind of your aha moment where you kind of saw things differently, or was there another moment?
So through my experience of consulting with these really big companies, you know, from the outside, they look very reputable and people expect them to be amazing and they want to know why they do so well. But realistically, they just have the capital and the access to the people to make sure that they can do that. And from this experience and being kind of in these companies and working with them, I realized like, oh, I'm the person that's doing this stuff. So why can't I bring that to other people? And then also, why am I putting myself in a concentration risk of working with just one client who's super demanding? How can I, so that was kind of my aha moment. But I was always a little bit too scared to go and do it, because wherever I would go, I was too young. I was not educated enough. I wasn't technical enough. So you always face these barriers, and I just didn't have the confidence in myself to go and do it. And I think this was like, they always say you have to hit rock bottom or like some type of lull to then move forward and think. So I hit that. And rather than starting my business, which I had been planning for such a long time, I was like throwing it away. And thankfully, I think you know Basir, he came to me and he knows me so well. And he was like, you can't, you're so passionate, like you speak about this stuff, when you do it, you know, it brings you to life, like you need to turn this into something more positive. So that, I think, is, I always say to him, like, if that never happened, maybe I would never be where I am. You gave me that confidence so I think it was like an accumulation of hitting that rock bottom and then having someone who is so close to you say like they believe in you to be able to do something. So
that's amazing. I feel like your community is so important, because they can see through the mess that you might be in the moment and be like, you know what, this isn't you. And really call you and bring you out of it.
100%. I was going to go be a data scientist. And like, although I knew I would make good money and I'd probably be great at it, it's like my passion is solving complex problems and helping people. And in my job, I can do those two things. So I think I'm really like, that is a very nice moment that I always reflect on whenever I'm having difficulties. I'm like, if I could do it then, I can do it now. So
Right.
Yeah.
Shout out to Basir.
Yeah.
So working remotely for the past like 3 years, I always meet really interesting people who are working on cool projects. And most of them, they kind of have this non-traditional lifestyle. And you also have a very non-traditional lifestyle.
Yes.
So you're an entrepreneur, founder. You're also doing a blog series where you're interviewing inspiring founders. And you're also a frequent traveler. So how do you manage that? Like, what does your work and travel lifestyle look like?
Okay, so I think this comes from being a child. I have ants in my pants, and I believe I got that from my parents. So we moved around a lot as kids, and it's really actually quite funny because my brother had the opposite effect. He found a place, got married, had kids, doesn't want to leave the country, doesn't want to move. Like, he is traumatized by change.
He's like, no, I'm finished. I don't have to do it anymore. If I have the option, my choice is to stay here.
Yeah. So growing up, every year we lived in different places. Other than like our real formative years where we were in the Outback, we kind of like moved around a lot and we saw different things. For me, I thrived in this environment because I'm very like extroverted and I love people, and wherever I go, I just want to like make friends all the time. So I think for me, I struggle in situations that are stagnant. So for me to be able to keep a contract for a year, it feels very boring, even though I'm doing very complicated and interesting tasks. So what I do to kind of like feed that need is I travel and I change my surroundings. And then the beauty of this is I feel like I get inspired. And that's why I also started this blog, because the last 6 years I've met so many amazing people and I've learned so many things, but it's just all in my head. And as a creative outlet, I'm trying to like express these beautiful stories from these really amazing people that I meet along the way. And then like they can also inspire other people because I get inspired. It gives me ideas. I share this, and vice versa. So that's kind of, my life is somewhat chaotic for other people, but for me, that's like how I create my calm. And like, I feel, I guess, content through traveling and all this. movement.
all the movement. It's so interesting because, since the pandemic, I feel like working remotely and doing it abroad has become so common.
Yes.
It's becoming increasingly more popular.
Yeah.
So what is it in terms of, so like how frequently are you changing from place to place? What does that look like for you?
Well, in the first year, it was like every week I was in a different location. And I wasn't even doing like normal flights. I was going from like Africa over to the Caribbean.
Every week?
To like literally, I was just going anywhere and everywhere because I was like, I'm not in Australia.
For a whole year, you were like that?
Yeah. And I got so fatigued.
I imagine.
Yeah, I think I went to like 30 different countries and like I was just everywhere.
I knew you had been everywhere, but like you've been everywhere.
And then I was like, I feel really tired and I'm working too many long hours. And then I have all this business stuff on the side. So I was like, I need to like just, calm down. And so now I typically spend about 3 months in each country and then I move to a new one. Mm-hmm. So, I've been now in Colombia for 2 months. I am leaving a little early, but that's because I miss Kenya and I want to go home. So I want to go back and see like all my friends and stuff like this. So, but there is always, I think, the importance of having a place that you're grounded. So I didn't have that for like 5 years. I was just kind of floating around and then, well, not even 5 years, I think it was like 4. And then I had my first experience where I went to Kenya and South Africa and it was the closest thing to home without having to like be at home and be a night owl because of the hours. Yeah. So now I frequent these places and I'm always going back and I'm spending more time there. And gradually I think I'm moving slower. And I really think it depends on what you have on your plate. If you're,
of course. And
every individual can handle different things differently and feels comfortable with different things. So you really just got to find like your flow and your tune and what works for you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think when you meet someone who's a little bit newer to traveling, who like you'll meet at a hostel or a different event, they're kind of like how you started, a different place every week or like several places in a month.
Yeah.
But then after you meet people who have been doing it for a while, they say that, oh yeah, I started like that, but now I like to do every month or every 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, because the thing is like you do travel a lot and it's really amazing in the beginning, but there's just some places that really like touch your soul, you know what I mean? Or just like capture your energy and you have to like spend more time there. And I feel like it happens kind of intuitively, and then you start to make more connections there and you start to get more involved. So like when you travel, it is very easy to feel like you're in a community because you're going to all these events and things like that. But if you think about it holistically, you do miss a lot of those elements. Like you may not necessarily have like frequent friends who are there all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and when you finally meet people you connect with, they're like, oh, I've just gone to Europe for 6 months or I've just gone to here. So it's a different vibe. And so if you do find a place where you have those more stable connections and you have a good boxing gym and you have like a really nice office or a cafe that you like to work and they remember you, these things start to like feel nice over time. And I think that's where you end up spending a little bit more in a country like that. So yeah.
It's like those little things that make a place feel like home. Like, do you have the connections where not can you just go out or go to dinner, but like if you're leaving, will they like water your plants? Are they going to be around to do those little things?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting because in the beginning, I think you're just so like enamored with the fact that like the world is your oyster, right? You can kind of go anywhere, do anything, see anything. But after time, I think like it wears off. I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah. Or like you notice different things. Your appreciation gravitates to a different area of that experience.
You have more, I guess, like a greater view of the world, a greater view of people, a greater view of things. And also like you change as an individual as you learn stuff. So yeah, there might just be a place. Like I vibe so much with Nairobi. So whenever I'm there, like, and some of my friends are from there too. Like when we leave, we're like, oh, my energy, it's just not the same.
It's different.
It fulfills you in a way that's kind of, nice. So yeah, I think you're like that with Colombia. So
this has become like a home base. And as I was telling you, I plan to stay here for a month or 2 just because I wanted to test it out.
Yeah,
but that was like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, precisely. And then when you leave, you're like, I need to get back.
Exactly. I always have a return date for whenever I do leave.
Yeah,
exactly that. Yeah. So you mentioned growing up in the Outback.
Yeah,
talk about that. It's a really interesting
It is
story.
a little bit of an interesting story. I think I was really lucky. Like not a lot of Australians have an appreciation or understanding for what it is like to grow up in the Outback. First of all, it is one of the most beautiful places. It's so remote. And it's so unlike anything, it's just very unique in its environment. Also, there's an amazing, I guess like that's where we have the most Indigenous people. So the culture is slightly different from, I guess, like the outskirts or like the edge of Australia where majority of people live. So long story short, we had a very bad recession in Australia when we were young. And my parents decided, well, if work is going to be difficult and we know we can get guaranteed work in the Outback, let's go and try that and take the kids out there. So that's kind of how it eventuated. And then, we spent a lot of time there. I grew up in like a tiny place with we had like, I think it was like a pub. And the pub was also kind of like your post office and your general store. And we had a church. So there's really nothing there.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's like, you can barely get radio. So basically the days consisted of my parents teaching the kids that were old enough to learn, because back then, it's obviously a lot better now. In terms of like a Western benchmarking of people and education, they were not you would have kids that might be 18 and kids that might be 5, and they would be at the same educational level. So my parents' job was to like try and teach everybody to make sure that they had a certain level of like numeracy and literacy.
So they'd be in the same class.
Basic, just huge, big class. And then, and anyone who was too young, like myself, would just go with the elders and we'd like run around the bush and just like do fun things, like sing songs and whatever.
That's
so
cute.
It was very communal and it was super beautiful and it was very remote. Like our closest main supermarket is in Alice Springs, which is like, 4 or 5 hours away.
Hold on. The closest supermarket was 4 to 5 hours away. I needed to like process that. What was the population of this town?
So we had one which was like 80 and the other one's like 1,000. So it's now huge. So near to us, the next biggest city is like, but it's grown. It's crazy because I was looking on the map the other day and I was showing someone and I was like, oh my goodness, they have like this, they have this, they have this, it's all this stuff. There's like full roads and all kinds of jazz. I'm sure they have internet now. So yeah, but the thing is, I think like it's the same. You know what, I think people, when they perceive Australia, think it's like a very developed country and like we're not.
Because we think in Sydney.
Yeah, but even in Sydney, like in Melbourne, you can't get internet everywhere. I lived in the city and my building was like somewhere that didn't have internet. And when you did manage to get an internet connection, anytime someone rings a phone in the vicinity, you get kicked off. Like,
I didn't know that. Or I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, so I think because our infrastructure is somewhat new, people think it's very good, but actually it's terrible. So I think also in Australia, like we're just calm about a lot of stuff and we don't know any better, so we just kind of like go with the flow. But it is changing as more people travel and move to Australia and bring their new ideas. We're starting to have to like get out of our bubble. But no, it was a really beautiful experience. I think I actually had a friend who moved to Australia and he was really struggling. And I said, well, you're a teacher. Why don't you go to the Outback? And he was like, cool. So he took his kids and wife to the Outback and they never came back. So it's just a really, like, it's a very communal, I think it's a nice experience. And also the beautiful thing about it is like I got to learn about at a very young age, a different culture and a different perspective and a different way of being. And then when we finally moved back, like when we had to go, I guess, to more formal schools and stuff and not just be taught by our parents, we then got to see kind of like the rest of how Australia is. So I have a deep appreciation for that. I think like that has really, like I'm comfortable anywhere. You can literally put me in a tiny village in the middle of Colombia or India and I'm going to be fine. Just like, I'm chill, whereas half my friends would be like freaking out. And that's also something that I like about Cape Town is we constantly have power outages and it reminds me of like, oh, we didn't have this stuff, you have to go outside and play, you have to like go make friends. So yeah, it kind of like gives me these nice vibes.
I see. It's very different growing up in a town or like a village, like so small, and you just rely on everybody that's around you.
You can't be naughty. You have to be very well behaved as well.
Because it'll come back to your parents, I'm sure.
Yeah, we're always in our best behavior.
So, was there anything from like your childhood experiences or growing up that you feel like had a big influence on who you've become, or anything that's made you, I guess, anything that's pushed you toward entrepreneurship from your childhood?
There's a story that my mum always tells me, and I feel like it fits kind of perfectly to who the person I am now is. So when we lived in this tiny village, I've always been obsessed with like just getting out into the world, you know. And so when my mom, I'd be like, I think I was like 2 at this time, when my mom would be like running me baths, I would be packing my stuff, like my teddies and things, and I'd be like running out of the house to the bus stop to try and like travel Australia. My mom would be like, she's gone again. She'll have to find me at the bus stop or maybe down at the church, like singing with everybody. So I've always, I think, been like this very outspoken person. Even when I was like little, my mom would take me to a restaurant. I'd be like, I'm going to go eat dinner with these people, like, and just go introduce myself and start eating dinner with like this random family.
So you've always been like this?
I think so, yeah. And so I think because I've always been very like interested in other people and like I've been super open, and my desire since I've been young has been to travel. Basically everything I've done in my life has been to try and like
do that.
Yeah, facilitate that dream. And so when that started happening 6 years ago, I was just like very happy and content with what I was doing. But then after a while, you're like, oh, I need to like make new goals and ambitions. And I guess it just kind of progresses from there. The other thing too, growing up in such a remote community, I think like intuitively people, or just by default, people are super resilient. And from a Western perspective, it doesn't seem like that because they don't live inside a house and they don't, you know, take normal medication and they don't go to school. But actually, when you think about the harsh environment of what it means to live in the outback and survive, like, and be one of the oldest living species like on this planet, like, I think like all of the things they talk about and the way that they approach like community and culture and that type of stuff, super resilient. So maybe there's something there that I've like learned from that and been inspired by. So yeah, I think it's kind of like an accumulation of things.
That's really interesting. When we talk about sustainability, most people think about the environment, or if they're thinking about it in terms of business, they'll think about it in terms of a product. So normally it's like that linear relationship that we have with a product. The immediate problem it solves, what happens when the product is finished, if they're really thinking about that. So with Mangrove and continuity, how do you encourage the startups that you're working with or larger companies to think about this in a more holistic way?
Yeah.
And when they're thinking about their business strategy, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think it's a matter of breaking down resilience into a simple way for people to understand. So resilience is kind of 3 key pillars. You have organizational resilience, which you think about from in terms of like harm to yourself as an organization. You also think about harm to your consumers. So what happens when things go wrong with your business? How many people are you hurting and in what way? And then finally, it's market, because some of these businesses are huge and the effects of like hurting so many customers, maybe it's businesses, maybe it's you have a white labeled product that's being sold or embedded into companies. So you have that market harm as well. So they're the kind of ways that I try and get companies to think about, because basically what happens in building a company is people find a problem, right? I'm going to fix this. They then build a product because they figure out the customer needs this product. Here's their needs. I've designed a product. Then they forget about the problem and the customers, and they just focus on the product, and everything else kind of fades away. And this is actually, I think, one of the issues that you find a lot in like fintech and, you know, these like fast moving industries. They're only concerned about the product. And actually, if something goes wrong with your product, the bigger you are, the more problems you can cause to yourself, to your customers, and the market. So they're kind of like the 3 areas that I spend a lot of time educating you know, the businesses I work with on. And the way that I do that, and Mangrove does that, is we kind of approach your business like a recipe. So you may have 100 ingredients that make up your recipe of your business, but what you want to understand is what are the most important ones? Like, what is your secret sauce? And then how do we make sure that that doesn't harm you, doesn't harm your consumers, and doesn't harm the wider market if you are in fact having that kind of impact. So that's it kind of like in a nutshell. So it's just trying to get them to think just beyond the product and revenue and, you know, that type of stuff.
And growth, you know, the keywords, right?
Yeah, exactly. So just bringing in a few more metrics and making sure that things are solid. So if something does go wrong, you know what's important and why, and you can react to a situation in an appropriate way, not just from a product perspective. Thinking about, okay, if this goes wrong, this is the type of harm we're going to cause. So how do we make sure we minimize those impacts?
Do you have an example of one of those pillars? So like a business case study of where they thought about the product, but there was some negative harm?
Yeah, for sure. So I recently worked for a big fintech company, and basically they're not just like a normal, everyday kind of, their mission is like money without borders, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And so the idea is that they want to be able to, people to be able to live and work and do whatever business, globally without any, I guess, friction. But the thing is, when I was discussing with them and I was trying to bring these topics forward, they were thinking about themselves as a traditional bank. Like, oh no, we just have a spendings account. People can use a card. Realistically, that is not your profile. You have a product, which means people can spend money anywhere. So these may be people that live from overseas in your country. These may be people from this country, on holiday. There may be businesses that pay contractors globally. And then also you white label this product to other fintech companies, to other recruitment companies, to other payroll companies. So their businesses can then use these products. That's a 3-level amount of harm. So it was about sitting down and helping them to understand, okay, from a risk-based perspective, these are the type of questions I want to ask about your users and your demographic. We came up with like kind of 4 profiles because they had already done research to understand who their users were. So you can use a lot of the information in the business to try and help them think about their products, like end-to-end customer journey and the harm that this could cause. So realistically, at the end of this, they went from being like, oh, we're just a traditional bank to actually we need to start thinking more about our platform product because we are embedding this into another company. And if that doesn't work, then that affects their customers and their customers. So it's a systemic thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of one example, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really great example. I think it's so common for businesses to think about the product itself and then maybe the immediate solution that they're providing versus the after effects. I think
the downstream impacts. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I think a good example we were talking about a couple of weeks ago was Klarna. So
yeah, precisely. Yeah.
So like solving, financing for day-to-day consumers, offering payment plans, but a couple of years later, it's contributing to a massive debt crisis, and a lot of people are taking on huge amounts of debt that they're not able to pay off. So of course, it's not something that was intentional, but it's one of those after effects that comes with it.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's really important. Like when you are thinking about, this is also why I'm so like stuck on this ecosystem crisis that we have in the startup world. It's like, have a problem, fix it for consumers, forget the consumers. Now just think about traction. Now just think about revenue, and like at all costs, forget about operational viability, forget about downstream impacts, forget about harm to consumers and market, like just make money. And then you have these toxic workplaces and you have all this harm. And I think if we took a moment to really think about the problems that we're trying to solve, and, we had a little bit more of a holistic view of that. So even the way that an investor approaches a business to think about whether it is a viable option, we can't just look at, oh, this is the market size and how much money I'm going to make. It's all like, there's no science or logic to it. And so I think we need to sit down and we need to think about a few different things. And so that's exactly why we decided to like design a dashboard for investors. So if they want to vet their company and make sure that their company has that ongoing viability, they can simply see individual risks or an aggregated portfolio risks based on these things that we've built in. So there's kind of 6 steps in building resilience in the framework, and you can check along the way to make sure that they're in place. And if they're not, you have very solid metrics to figure out what are your areas of concern and potentially the harm that this can cause. And I think like we need to think a little bit more holistically when we're just dishing out money. It's crazy how much money people are losing on companies that are just like a fancy idea.
Yeah, it is quite mind-boggling to think about and see numbers behind it.
It's like billions per year. It's mental.
It's insane. Yeah. So a lot of our listeners will have their own business, some like medium-sized businesses, and they want to have a good profit. So still making money with their business, of course, but also doing good and being conscious for the environment and people who are involved. So if someone wants to incorporate resilience into their business strategy, what's a good place for them to start?
So honestly, the most amazing place for a business to start is understanding their ingredients. And so like typically, to simplify this, we kind of help companies do that. So we have 3 main categories. We have assets, and these are things like your technologies, your third parties, and like the cloud solutions that you might use. We have workflows, and these are the processes that you do day to day. And then we have teams. And so we kind of map things out for them that way. And what happens is when you start to give people a visual element to their business, they start to understand some really amazing things. So it's like bottlenecks, which can actually cost them time and money. Concentration risks where they may have too much reliance on a third party or too much reliance on a team, and also redundancies. There's a whole lot of stuff in your business that just falls through the cracks and it's not connected anywhere. So when we start to build out this visual element of your business, you see all these things, and that's when you can save money, you can reduce risk of like failure, and also you can you can diversify things. In a lot of companies, I feel like concentration risk is one of the biggest areas of concern, because you have one person who knows everything, you have one vendor that does everything for you, and you don't realistically know what that looks like. The other side of our tool is when you do work with third parties, we've built in some very simple questionnaires, so to help founders know that they're actually bringing someone on board who is trustworthy and reliable and actually thinks about these things themselves. And so it helps you to understand the risks around your vendors as well, and how you can maybe improve those relationships to make sure that if they do something crazy, it's not going to affect you and your customers. So I think it's really just about having that proper understanding of what your recipe is and why it's important. And that will really do so much for businesses.
So your tool Mangrove, it can be used both for startups and it's also for investors as well?
Yeah, so it's for startups, and we have enterprise as well. It's literally the same, product. We have just made it extremely accessible for startups. So currently, if you are in the resilience market, you're looking at around 400,000 per year to be able to have resilience in your business, entry level. And then you have ongoing costs, and you have people like me who need to manage those systems. So it's a very expensive thing. We simplified it and made it 15K a year for a startup. So, and helping. It's obviously not as complex as those systems because you don't need to be a financial company, but you can gear towards that if you need. The idea is it's just giving you that really simplified way to be able to understand stuff. And then on the other side, you have all these beautiful metrics that you can supply to a VC, or they can monitor you remotely as part of their portfolio. And then it helps both sides of the equations to ask the right questions. You can't manipulate stuff. You can't you know what I mean? It's just there, and it's dynamic and it's live and it's consistently giving you the best version. And then we've built in basically a version of me into the tool.
Minty.
It's like a co-pilot. So when you get stuck on something and you realize I have a concentration risk, what does this mean? Step by step, it will show you screen by screen how you can either document and make sure that you look after this risk, or you can remove it from your business. So you don't actually need someone with skills to be able to come in and help you build a better business.
And that's super accessible, especially for smaller and medium-sized businesses. Where, access to something like this or hiring a specialist in this area would be a huge investment.
100%. You could give away equity and, get 10 advisors who could help you across a whole bunch of different areas, or you could get a tool that isn't going to take, equity in your company. It's at a very low cost, and you could build this out and learn a lot of things about your business. A lot of the reasons why businesses fail are completely preventable. They just don't have oversight and clarity of all their ingredients, and then they don't know how to respond to stuff appropriately because they don't prioritize. So that's the idea, is we can hopefully help a lot of businesses get to the 5th year, get to the 10th year. Yeah.
What are some mistakes or common mistakes that you see businesses make when it comes to their strategy or managing those risks?
First of all, not documenting and not caring about it. So that's
number one.
Stage one, we need to understand. No, but realistically, a lot of companies will say, for instance, we were working with a company that helps with mobility of disabled people, kind of like Uber. But they specialize in that. They were not aware of what their key products were. They thought that they knew what it was. But after we went through and we mapped everything and they answered the questions, they were like, oh, we hadn't even considered this. And then we started building out their services. They didn't realize what was actually involved in it. So a service is like your end-to-end delivery to a customer. And we put all these ingredients in it so you can see what's actually made up. And then it gives you, based on all of the scoring, it tells you what's important and why, because you've answered these questions to say there's customer impact, market impact, etc.
So what does it mean for them to have not understood what their core offering really was?
I don't think it's necessarily it's deliberate. It's just when you build a product, and you start thinking about fixing a problem, you're not necessarily thinking about all of the impacts. You're really focused on the product and delivering that product and making sure that it works.
But and that one thing that you set out to do, even though you might be solving other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Precisely. Or you're so focused on this one because that is the main topic at the moment that realistically this one's your revenue generator. And this is the one. And so by putting these ingredients together, ranking them and, connecting them, you can see the dependencies, you can see the usage, you can see the importance, and you can prioritize and make better data decisions in your business. So I think it's not necessarily like deliberate. It's just by default that this happens.
I see.
Yeah.
It makes me think of another guest that we had on the show, Water is Basic. So they're a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we talked about it.
Yeah. So they set out to be building water wells.
Yeah.
And doing maintenance of water wells. But then some time in, they realized like, no, this isn't just about repairing wells. They're educating women and teaching them to do it and to have their own businesses.
Perfect example. Yeah.
So they had to completely change their messaging. And once that happened, like things took off. They got way more donations, things skyrocketed.
And this is also a really nice thing too, is like if you have your inventory built out and you have it linked together and you understand it, you can take this as a blueprint and you can fiddle with it and figure out, how do I apply this in a different region? How do I make a new product from this? What is the impact if I make these changes? And so there's a lot of things that you can do with this information. And I think that's what's missing with a lot of startups. They're just building the plane flying because that's what they've been told to do. And that is the ethos and the ecosystem. But realistically, like when you build a business, if you build it while you're flying, it's going to fall apart. Majority of unicorns fail. They make it to that status, and then within 5 to 10 years, they're gone. And it's because they don't think about operational viability. And so I think if we have all this information in front of us, you would make a lot different decisions in the boardroom or your meetings. And yeah, so that's one of the nice things that we've been getting from our pilot study is like many aha moments with our businesses. Yeah. They're like, oh, damn, this is amazing. Oh, and they're like telling us, oh, it fixed this problem. And I was like, I didn't even think our tool was worth like in that area. So we're seeing these benefits of how people can leverage this information. Yeah, so it's super exciting.
That's amazing. And I think one of the really cool things from you telling me about it was that it helps you to be able to make those assessments and gives you the tools to be able to, okay, so you have the information, now what's next? How do you make the informed decision to do something about it?
Yeah, and we can either guide you or you can go and do it by yourself, but like you have that choice. Because every business is different and every business has different risk thresholds. But coming back to that, if you don't document it and you don't have an understanding or some type of qualitative way to understand that, you can never document these risks and you can never have these informed discussions and think about how you move your business going forward. It's kind of like, being in the dark. And like padding around, being like, oh, we're gonna go over here.
Or just like going with the flow, or just
your vibes,
vibes. Just trying something, see if it works. Didn't work, we'll try something else. But not having that, the data to really back that up.
So I think building a business is very difficult, but if you have clarity on things, it can really like change the trajectory of stuff.
So what's your vision for Mangrove?
To be honest, my vision is to just work with a lot of amazing businesses. It's a passion for me to be able to see like these changes. Obviously originally it was kind of like, I want to automate this crazy lady out of a job so no one has to deal with her again. But
or people like her. Yeah. That's some motivation, honestly.
Yeah, I've grown.
She must have been a real treat.
Yeah, but then through that process, I think like I would have never gone down this path and I never would have met all these amazing entrepreneurs and learned about all these businesses and seen like the problem isn't just with the businesses being built, it's with the VCs investing money, not understanding, the huge variety of businesses and models and stuff like that. So it's just really like it's a passion and an enjoyment for me to be able to be part of all of these different businesses and maybe help them to be more sustainable or get better outcomes. And we're not talking like, oh, I want every business to be a unicorn. It's like if this business, which is, for instance, like one that I'm working with, they're digitizing, I guess, the recruitment process in Uganda. So previously what would happen is you have businesses hiring people maybe the people they're hiring are not as good as they say, or maybe they do the work and there's no accountability. And so that, it's already a place where people need to make money. So they're kind of like the middleman in that. They're digitizing that, allowing talent to be, contacted from all over Africa and all over the world, but then making sure that there's a level of accountability. And then through this process of them earning wages and stuff, they start building credit reports, so then they can get access to different things. If a particular person maybe necessarily doesn't have the skills, they allow them to go and do training. So it's just like this really amazing, platform. And so if I can work with them, they actually just got acquired recently. And so this whole process helped with the acquisition because they had clarity over what their business processes are. They have a really good inventory of stuff. So like there's all these different ways you can use this information. And for me, that's really exciting and really like fulfilling to be like, oh, I got to help in some kind of way. Yeah.
Like you've had a hand in their story.
Yeah. And I love that. And then I'm learning from everything, and then I can bring this to other people. And so that's exciting. And then obviously that also feeds into my blog. When I meet these amazing entrepreneurs, I take their learnings and I try and like incorporate that, and building a lot of educational material around resilience for startups and venture capital firms at the moment. So we have like a newsletter where we try and share regulations or resilient success and failures. And we talk about interesting resilience practitioners. And so just really trying to like get the information from being concentrated in these very, like high corporate environments to being accessible and being able to use them in other industries.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun. I love it.
So building a business from the ground up, it comes with a lot of challenges, and really like being a woman on top of it. It's got its own set of unique ones as well.
It does.
What are some things that you've had to overcome, or maybe some things that you're still dealing with?
I think the key thing, even in consulting, like as a woman, I think I was like 20 something when I was really early in my 20s when I got the job with Goldman Sachs. To be honest, I didn't know who they were. I thought they were like a makeup company. I had no idea. And then when I finally got the job, it was the craziest experience too, because the interview was working and I could hear them. They could see me, but I couldn't see them because none of the screens were working. I was so nervous to tell them. So I sat there the whole time. I did the interview. It was like between Christmas and New Year's, and they ended up giving me the job. I don't know how I got it because I was a grad prior to that. It was just like one of those moments. And then I got home and I was like, I need to figure out what I'm going to do. Because I'm meant to be like working for the Office of National, Global Security and running all these guards and But actually it was a really good experience because that taught me that if you kind of believe in yourself and you can go through with stuff like and have conviction, most people will give you an opportunity. And then like the key there is to follow through and put that effort in. And so that's what I'm always trying to do. And so I think that is also sometimes met with challenge. So like, a lot of the guys were like, you're so young. What do you know? How come you get an office and all this type of stuff? And I was like, to be honest, I don't know. I'm just here. But I had to be very professional. So like, I will always try and prove myself through the application of my skills. When people see you actually making traction in a difficult environment, people will then tend to lean into it. The other thing too is people will always try and like put things and roadblocks, and especially as a woman, if you're working in a primarily male industry, like when I was working in the prisons, I also encountered this a lot of the time. You're like this 19-year-old girl coming in and doing like security provisioning for defense bases and prisons, and like, who are you? And I just took a lot of that in my stride, and I allowed that to be like, okay, if that is your perspective, then maybe I need to go and get more educated on a topic, or maybe I need to build something so you can practically see something, or like something tangible about what I'm doing. So at times it does get the better of you. But then, so for instance, in my current business, I struggle a lot with VCs when I do speak to them because they don't believe my technology works because I'm a woman who's not technical and I went and built a software company. So at one point I went and found a male who I'm so grateful I have now, Abdul, because he's amazing. He's like, I don't know what I would do without him. But at the same time, the minute that he came on board, nobody questioned anything. you know, because, oh, Abdul must have been part of this. So that was kind of something that was a little humbling and like a little frustrating at the same time.
I imagine.
And then also because that happened the first time, I was like, okay, I just need to go get a bunch of men and put them in my business. But at the same time, I was like, it wasn't proving to give me any benefit. So like we had to streamline again, and it's just back to Abdul and I. But like it's a continual learning process of like how to build a good business and like how to overcome challenges. You find some people are just strong and they'll push through it. But like I can't be like that 24/7. And there are going to be times where I second guess myself, and then I try and get someone to support. And I think it's just like iterating and learning.
Yeah.
Nothing is perfect, or
I can't believe I can't believe, but I can believe, VC responses just saying like, no, you're a woman, you couldn't have done this.
Literally.
That's
so
crazy.
infuriating. My friend actually, she has an amazing business. She built a new fiber. She works with a scientist, and she has raised so much money, and like the comments she gets from men, I want to help you because you're a woman, and she's like, I've built a new fiber that creates clothing that's going to solve the problems of microplastics,
which is like an insane thing to accomplish, and she's done it, and they're giving her pity.
Precisely. So I think like you're always going to come into these challenges, but you learn from them. And the best thing to do is to just take it in your stride. Like it's sometimes really hard not to react. But you've just got to like sit with it and think about, okay, what is my strategy to overcome this problem? Because if you allow it to consistently confront you and break you down, you're never going to get anywhere. And you know what? In every situation, there's always a solution. For me, I went and found Abdul. It actually ended up being amazing. And I'm so glad that like we worked together, because now the business is 10 times further than it ever could have been by myself. So there is always like solutions that can bring you benefits. You just got to like take a moment, recalibrate, strategize, and then approach again. So yeah,
I think it's so important to take a beat.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes because you just want to be like,
I imagine, especially because you have like a very outgoing and you speak what's on your mind, like that type of personality.
I have no filter. Yeah, I'm very Australian.
That's wild. Yeah. So what are some other things that have helped you to overcome challenges like that? So definitely like taking a moment and like thinking about how you want to address the situation in a way that's going to be well received and help you in the long run.
Yes.
But is there anything else or any resources that have helped you to be able to overcome challenges, either just business in general or specific to being a woman?
I found it really nice to actually be part of these different communities. So I did some accelerators for like a lot of the accelerators that I have decided to be part of are not really anything that you get money from, but it's been accelerators where you're connected to either like an underrepresented or a female community, and having the ability to talk to people in a nice space that go through similar issues is just so nice to soundboard. And so like you learn things from them and how they approach it. Like for instance, in my business, we have people from all different countries, and because we have not the most standard names, there can be bias. So one of the solutions that one of the girls suggested to me is you just have generic emails, and then once you connect with people, so we have data at Mangrove, info at Mangrove, growth at Mangrove, because someone may not receive a particular name that well, and that has actually really served me and been amazing. So I've learned from like these little things of like how to navigate some of these biases, and then once you connect with them, you can use APSAT, whatever it is. So like these little tips and tricks from people that are maybe slightly further on than you, and also they find amazing people that help them and they can connect you. So I think like the networking element is really important. And then education. Typically people don't like something because they don't understand it. It's not because they actually hate you or whatever, it just comes from a place of lack of knowing. So you can either educate yourself or you can try and educate that person and share things with them, because the more people have in common with you, the less likely they are to think of you negatively or whatever. And so I think like a lot of it doesn't come from a bad place. It's just like conditioned bias that we have from our surroundings. Like we're products of our environment in essence. You grew up this way, you saw these things, so therefore you might be more inclined to think a certain way. And so like remembering this and trying to think about how you can fix that situation is usually just through information and having like a connection with somebody.
And that's such an important perspective to have, that we're products of our environment. Someone who may not be receiving what you're doing or you're being well, it's because of what they've grown up around or because of past exposures.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
everyone has different views of things. So something that
Mhm.
you may think is unfair doesn't necessarily
Translate to the same thing or
yeah,
equate to having bad intentions.
precisely. And so
Mhm.
then it's just like you need to figure out what that is with that person. And you can typically always turn something around. It's sometimes it's really hard not to get upset and frustrated in a situation. But if you actually just like take some calm in it and take a moment to think about like how I can circle back to this, it doesn't have to be like that. You can just say, okay, cool, like this isn't really going anywhere. We might revisit this and I'll be in contact,
Mhm.
Spend some time thinking and learning about that person, trying to understand things a little bit more, especially in business. Because if you were just like upset with everybody,
You're not gonna get
you're not
anywhere.
going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And then also like you're going to have to work with people you don't like. You have to work with assholes. It is what it is. So you're going to figure out like how can I manage that?
Mhm.
And it's usually through, yeah, I guess like just trying to find some
Common ground, yeah. Like where can you see eye to eye and then move from there, even if it's not on everything.
It is, I think, impossible on this planet to find someone that you don't have a commonality with. If you
Because
actually,
it's gonna be something.
you may both love sushi. You know what I mean? Like,
It could be as simple as that.
yeah, and like you would be surprised the minute you hit that. Like
People open up when you find whatever stupid commonality. It's true. It's true.
Yeah, and then it's easier to then break down barriers. So
Mhm.
I think like that is really key, especially when you're always approached with these types of animosities and biases.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, are there any trends in entrepreneurship that you're excited for, or the way that we think about entrepreneurship?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I'm excited about a lot of stuff in entrepreneurship.
Mhm.
I just like I love everything about it. It's really just the disruptive factor is really nice. People are always wanting change and to try new things. And I'm more excited about entrepreneurism in emerging economies than I am in the West, to be honest, because we kind of have like fad things that we're fixing, But like when you travel like in Latin America or you travel in Asia, first of all, they have different problems where they're building things from the ground up. And the best part about it is they don't necessarily want to inherit what has happened in the West because it's not always
Not always positive.
yeah. So like, for instance, like mobile money in Africa, best thing ever. You don't need connection. You don't even really need to have a bank account, but you can SMS money to like the driver to the little store on the side of the road. It just like it makes being in that country and moving so much easier, especially as a foreigner. When you first of all, you may not speak the language, you don't understand the currency. All you have to understand is numbers. And it's also giving access to unbanked people to be able to do trade and be part of
participate in the economy in a different way. Yeah.
Precisely. So like there's stuff like this that's super cool. And like we would never use that in the West because we've built all these elaborate systems to move money and it would be a waste if we just stopped using them. But like this is simple, it's cheap, it just uses mobile technology. So like
and it works for the context. Yeah.
Literally, yeah. And so I think like these are the cool things that you get to experience when you travel and you see different countries, how they solve like problems which are like, oh, we use paper menus. You know what I mean? Like here everything is QR codes and you just text money. Wow, So like, yeah, it's cool to see that. And that's why I'm excited about like being in India and the Middle East and Latam and Africa and Asia. Yeah.
That's interesting. Like the difference between, what you would see in the Western world and how we kind of formulate everything in terms of the existing systems, but there it's more creating something new.
Yeah. Like so many cool things, especially around like I'm kind of obsessed with moving money and moving things. I find like the resilient space is really tricky there. So I'm always looking at like, all these innovative ideas of how people are doing stuff and overcoming extremely complicated situations.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, like so in Asia, there's no payment systems. Like we call them payment rails, which is like where you can facilitate money moving between countries.
Okay.
So they have to come up with ways to move money digitally without this. And it usually relies on kind of like you'll partner with this person and you'll partner with this person and you'll partner with that. And then you might get a license here, which gives you access to this system. And you kind of like Frankenstein it all together. But they don't want to have to keep partnering and they don't want to have to build infrastructure. So they're coming up with new ways like using DLT, which is like blockchain technology to move money because it's cheaper, faster, and it's 100% transparent. You can't manipulate it. So there's like all these really interesting things. Like, you're like, oh, yeah, like that's on the internet. And you moved billions of dollars for this amount of money, whereas banks are moving billions for millions, you know? It's going to revolutionize stuff. But yeah, so I think if you travel, you get the cross-pollination of these ideas and learn different things, and then you can teach them and share them and
share those kind of like the cross-pollination of knowledge there.
Yeah. Which you would probably never really experience unless you went to these places.
Unless you went and experienced it yourself. Yeah. Are there well, I guess my next question for you is, when you think about what you want to be remembered for, what does that look like for you after you're long gone? This is a question I like to ask everyone who's on the show.
This is also like, I love to ask people, what does your future look like? Best scenario. I think it's just mainly about like making resilience accessible, you know, and making it simplified. It doesn't need to be complicated, and it doesn't need to be, you know, an isolated advantage for global conglomerates and finance companies. This is something that's broadly applicable and can really make a difference. So if I manage to do that knowledge transfer and make it accessible, I'd be happy with that. Yeah. Doesn't have to be anything like money or whatever.
Short and sweet. You're like, if you can help somebody with this knowledge that you have, then that's that. I
feel like it can make a lot of difference. It's just about refining the message and also getting it out to people so they can understand and do things themselves.
That's beautiful. Amen to that. So are there any other things, as we're wrapping up, is there any closing thoughts that you have for the viewers?
No.
Or any last pieces of advice? It's okay if you don't. We talked about a lot.
Yeah, I feel like I word vomited.
No, it was great. You've given some really great tips. And actually, it's been really great having you on the show. I think a lot of people will really appreciate this conversation. And I mean, you're doing some really amazing things with Mangrove and your consulting company. And shout out to your friend who encouraged you to keep going.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a really pivotal moment for your story.
Yeah.
Be able to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I always tell him that. Fun. And he's like, oh, I know. But yeah, I think it's important. Also, yeah, my advice would be like, really lean on your network. You'd be surprised. I think sometimes when you are building a business or you're having failures, people, they're not necessarily like, not ashamed, but like they don't want to talk about it. Actually, when you start to like voice things like this with your network or people, you find solutions so quickly, or you find that it's actually not that unique, you know? So I would say if you are struggling with anything, like go to your network, or even people that may have something similar to what you're dealing with. People are really helpful. So yeah, and that makes it easier to like overcome issues. Yeah, it's always having your community or people who can support you is better than trying to figure it out yourself, because it can 100%. Take a lot longer. Yeah, but I feel like in the beginning you want to fix everything yourself. You want to feel like I did this, like this is my thing and I did it all by myself. You want to be self-made, but no one really is. Yeah, 100%. Really, like you could do it in 2 weeks, or you could do it in 2 hours. Yeah, so like whatever, work smarter, not harder. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Minty. I feel like this was such a really good conversation, and love learning a little bit more about your background and with what you're doing with Mangrove too, and how you're helping businesses. Cool. Thanks for having me. I love your podcast. So. Thank you. Good. Okay, we'll cut it here. Awesome.